Well, I began hearing of Solanus Casey when I was at St. Lawrence Seminary as a student in 1946. And Father Gerald Walker was the rector at the time, and he always talked about Solanus Casey, And when I applied for the order in 1950, or 49, whatever that was, he said, "Oh, you're going to be with Father Solanus. He's a holy man. He heals people and all that." So I was kind of awed by him. And so when I went to novitiate, I watched him like a hawk those first days. What happened was, when I was invested the first time, and the first morning we novices were really beginning to live the life, I was one of the servers at breakfast, and we had to bring the friar. Those are tables like that the friars ate on in the benches, and then you served them from the beginning. So all the professed friars were there. The local minister, the guardian was first, and so forth. And Solanus was right next to the vicar. And so I watched him when I don't know what I was carrying. But Solanus was there, and he had a bowl in front of him and his silverware. And the milk went by, that went down. The cereal went by, that went down. The coffee went by, that went in the same bowl. And the grape juice came, and I said, oh, if that's holiness, you can have it. So that was my first impression of Solanus Casey. But I knew he was a saint from what Father Gerald said, and then what Eugene told my brother. And so I kind of watched him, and he was a saint. He was an old man in that time, older than I. Well, I'm 84 right now, so I guess I can't identify with it too well, because I'm not jerky and slow in that. But I was college age, when you go to the novitiate in those days. So I was 18, 19 years old. And I was like any college student. I imitated people, and I referred to them as they influenced me. Anyhow, he was an old man, and he was jerky, but he had a lot of energy, more than his body could take, actually. So he hobbled around, but his voice was always very raspy, and so I would mimic him. Yes, like he would say, faith, Frater, you have to have faith, yes, And so we kind of mimicked him for that. And when he came into the choir, he would plop down. But those days we kissed the floor. He didn't have to at his age, but he crouched in, and boom, and it took him at least 15 feet to get up again as he ran over to his chair. So those are my first impressions of him. But I respected him then, and I saw people come and talk to him, and he was on the phone a lot, people calling from Detroit. This was in Huntington, Indiana, at the novitiate. And I would go by the phone booth, and he would have the phone like this, and he'd say, yes. And I'd hear him say, oh yes, faith, my lady, faith. And I'd watch him at that, and he said that to us as friars too. The common thoughts that were expressed by other Capuchins was, he does not heal friars. He told friars are bound to suffer. And so I watched that, and so I didn't even ask to be healed of anything. I asked him to pray for me at one time when I went to his room, but it seemed that way, that he didn't heal any friars that we know of, significantly. And he was a man of faith. Yes, brother. That was his common. And then he played the violin, and he wasn't very good. He was screechy, and he'd sing Madame Macri or Holy Macri, whatever it was, And we had as novices had to listen to that at the recreation time when the guardian said, Father Solanus is going to play a tune, and it was terrible, you know. So we mimicked him about that too, as college students would, you know. And I've been known as that. I use it in homilies. I remember preaching in Detroit one time to a ladies group. I think it was the Guild. And I plopped down just like Solanus did. And then I said, you know, he's a saint, I know that, but it's hard to live with saints. So anyhow, I was, when I went to, when I made vows, then I went to Garrison, New York for a year, and then I came back to Huntington. And so I lived with Solanus for 1 year in novitiate and 3 years of philosophy, or the college years. So I watched him a lot when he worked with the bees and that, and he was never stung, you know, but yes, be careful, yes, brother, yes. Anyhow, we saw him work, and I saw he was a saint, he was holy, and I respected him for that. And so I went on to Marathon, and then I went on to St. Lawrence Seminary. I taught there for 18 years. And I kind of lost people in Wisconsin. The friars of Wisconsin really don't speak of Solanus very much, unless you hear preachers refer to him. But friars really aren't that excited about Solanus here. But I was rekindled in Solanus when I was transferred to Detroit as vocation director and head of the postulancy program in Detroit. And wherever I went in Detroit, I ran into them talking about Solanus. My son had this illness. I went to Solanus, and he prayed with him, and he was healed. My mother-in-law was healed. And so it was wherever I went. And even in when I went into the mission band, whenever I preached, and I met people afterwards, after the homilies or after the various services we had at missions all over the Midwest. Wherever I went, they saw me as a Capuchin friars because of my robe, and they said, oh, we knew Father Solanus. Either that or you're from do you know of St. Lawrence Seminary? Those two items they know about Capuchins in the Midwest. People know about it more than friars do, I think. So when I was in Detroit, he just became alive. And so I respected him for that. And I use him as an example. And the main examples are, thank God ahead of time, you know, and healing. When it really hit me was the value of Solanus and his holiness, that he had God on his sleeves, you know, and he prayed with people, and there was an energy there, a spirituality that flowed from him. And what really touched me is when I came back to St. Lawrence Seminary, and I got involved in charismatic renewal, and I went out preaching to people, and then we had healing services, and I prayed over people, you know, and they flopped out, you know. At the first time it happened, oh my God, you know, I says, this is what Solanus did. He prayed with them, and they flopped right out, and then they call it slain in the spirit. You know, God touched them. The energy just overwhelms people. And I experienced that a lot in healing services. I would pray over them. And they would just, you know, I would just let them lay, and they just let them lay for a while, and they come to. But, and I thought, oh my God, Solanus was ahead of his time. And that's a theme that I've carried through, that Solanus was the head of his time. And what he did, I did in my own ministry. People were healed, and they talk about it, you know. And I don't consider myself a saint in any way, but what he did was he was filled with God, and he prayed and interceded. He let God do. He just became an instrument God's message and God's presence and God's healing touch. So he really touched people, and I followed him for that. And whenever I go to Detroit, I go to his grave, and I go up to the where they have the coffin now, and he's buried below that in the basement. But I always pray that. And I know my sister-in-law, when relatives would come to Huntington for visiting me, they wanted to see Solanus. And I know my sister-in-law went to talk to him as she was carrying her fourth child, and she asked for help for that assistant. And there was problems with their farming work, and she asked for him, and so she always talks about Solanus, and she talks to her children about Solanus more than I do. So anyhow, Solanus has been significant in my life, and he continues to be so. And where he's alive is in Detroit. Wherever I went, my grandfather was healed by him, or you're a Capuchin, you're down from the monastery, at the food kitchen. So you hear all these stories, and you become part of it. And Solanus is a meaningful person for me. But I just feel it's hard to live with saints. Yeah, he's alive. I believe he is a saint, and he is still interceding for us, and his healing touch is still touching people. And people like to pray to saints and people who are gone before, more than me as a priest. So I can talk about him. And he is alive in the sense that when I was director here at Montiel Werner Retreat Center here in Appleton, I took my staff to Detroit. And our maintenance people and one who worked in the office, Jim Ritchie and Bob Hippis, we stayed there at Solanus Center overnight at St. Bonaventure's. And they were sitting in the chapel of St. Bonaventure's for about a couple of hours on a Sunday afternoon and watched people coming. He said, like Jim said, I watched this lady on her knees, from the tabernacle over to the gravesite of Solanus and praying there. And young people came and old people came and grandmas came. And it's just significant. And every time I go to Detroit, I pray at Solanus' grave.